prize have all been tried. Court 1 is currently hearing the case of a part-time sex aid salesman who's accused of murdering his wife's lover. The prosecution claims Graham Skates had a bizarre sexual pact with his wife Rowena. He encouraged her to have affairs so long as she didn't get emotionally involved. The prosecution claims that when she did become attached to a wealthy company director, Richard Nelligan, her husband attacked and killed him. Skates denies murder, and today Prince Philip will hear the start of the defence case. Yesterday, Justice Rougier adjourned the case before lunch and urged barristers to make sure they had evidence for the Duke to hear later today. Scottish police are this morning questioning a 36-year-old Palestinian about the Lockerbie bombing, which killed nearly 300 people. Abu Talib, who was jailed for life in December for bombings in Denmark and the Netherlands, is refusing to cooperate. His flat near Stockholm was searched after it was discovered he'd travelled to Malta in the period before the Lockerbie bombing. Detectives found shreds of Maltese clothing in the suitcase, which is believed to have contained the bomb. Imelda Marcos, the former First Lady of the Philippines, was allegedly advised by US President George Bush how to spend her millions. The accusation came as the case against Mrs. Marcos was opened in New York. She's also been accused in court of treating the country as her own personal piggy bank. Mrs. Marcos is accused of racketeering, fraud and obstruction of justice. She could go to jail for 50 years if convicted. The Chancellor has been speaking about what he called the bumpy ride ahead before the inflation rate begins to come down. He told a Commons committee yesterday interest rates should fall next year, and he said he still intends to take the pound into Europe's exchange rate mechanism.
The Treasury Committee hearings gave MPs from all parties their first opportunity to quiz the Chancellor on the budget. John Major stuck closely to the forecast he gave then, but he did claim there were now real signs that high interest rates had done the trick and were slowing demand.
So I think interest rates will be beginning to move down. I think if we're going to have inflation at 5%, which is our central forecast for the middle of next year, it defies logic that interest rates would still be at their present level of 15%.
And for a committee that's on record supporting sterling's early entry into Europe's exchange rate mechanism, the Chancellor's answers to their questions followed the more positive vein he said to have taken with his European colleagues last weekend.
Have the conditions other than inflation for British membership of the exchange rate mechanism been met, apart from details?
No, but they're moving towards being met. A good deal of progress has been made on a number of the conditions for membership of the exchange rate mechanism, but they haven't all been met.
John Major's answers reasserted his independent line from the Prime Minister's almost universally negative stance on the European monetary system. And on the budget too, he insisted it was no one's but his own. Mark Nichols, Sky News.
You're watching Sky News Overnight. We'll have more after the break, including the West Indies taking a thrilling victory over England in the one-day test. Stay with us.
Weekday mornings on Sky News, the International Business Report puts you in the picture regarding the state of the markets around the world. With reports from London, Zurich and New York, and a live link with Reuters' financial newsroom in Tokyo, the International Business Report brings a truly global view on world financial news. Presented by Penny Smith and Sky City editor Michael Wilson at 5, 6 and 11 every weekday morning. Stay ahead in tomorrow's business world. Sky's International Business Report, every weekday morning, only on Sky News.
I don't know how Eileen does it. Getting her windows cleaned on a Sunday. And inside. Just look at that. The size of number 15's new telly. Still, it can't be that good. Not if it needs repairing that soon. Trish and Brendan must be moving. They said they were going away. But I thought they meant on holiday.
If you see anything suspicious, don't hesitate. Call the police. Crime. Together, we'll crack it.
If you want to know more about food additives, write for your free copy of the booklet, Food Additives, The Balanced Approach.
Mobile One Motorsports News has all the latest news from all the major motor events from all over the world. Every Thursday night, Mobile One Motorsports News puts you in the driving seat at 7, 6 in the UK. It's the fastest show on wheels, and it's on Eurosport.
Welcome back. You're with Sky News Overnight. It's 20 minutes past 12. We now return to our main story this morning, and that's siege at Strangeways prison. We've heard from our reporter there, Shirley Lewis, that there's renewed movement inside the prison. Now we go over to her live in Manchester. Shirley.
Good evening. Oh, sorry, good morning now. The rumours here at Strangeways prison is that something is about to happen, something is imminent. We have actually seen a van go out with the police escort. The roads all around are totally sealed off. Behind me, it's the wing. The movement is centred on the wing with the two lit windows. Just below those windows there is a third window, and we keep seeing people moving backwards and forwards. Now, there were no lights there earlier on this evening. Inside the compound, where before we've seen the riot police scurrying past, shields up, they now appear to be far more relaxed and are walking past nonchalantly. The last few that we've seen not even having their shields with them. The ambulance is still parked by the gateway, but the rumour is that something has happened, possibly more prisoners have surrendered.
Shirley, which wing is that? Is there any? Have you any idea?
We are not sure. We know that it's one of the four obviously remaining wings that the prisoners are in. We have a feeling it could be the A wing. The layout of the prison hasn't been made clear to us as yet. It took half an hour of fairly heavy fighting for them to take back the E wing earlier on yesterday, but this evening there hasn't been that much shouting or jeering. We've heard some bangs, some clattering, but we haven't actually heard the sounds of pitched battles. It would appear that the siege is crumbling. There's a couple of prisoners left on the roof just below the rotunda, but very, very quiet.
So is the feeling there that this really could be all over now?
Certainly coming to a halt. Don't forget, there's still a lot of lights off in this prison. We know the electricity has been cut off to the wings where they are still in control. I think it's a case of it's crumbling slowly.
Have you seen any movement from outside of the wing at all? Any bodies or any casualties or anybody being brought out?
No, only that ambulance that earlier on was parked fairly out into the road. That has reversed back in. Clearly we can't see the doors. If somebody is brought out, they're going to be screened. But that ambulance has been in that position now for the last hour. As I say, we saw a police escort taking a van out right from the top end of the road, and more importantly, I think all the roads in the area have been totally sealed off, and that's the first time coming into the 4th day, the 4 days of this riot.
Okay, Shirley, thanks very much. We'll come back to you later on in the morning. To other news now, defence cutbacks are in the air in Washington, and one of the first victims could be the B-2 stealth bomber. The Pentagon planned to buy the 132 of the not-so-secret, top-secret bomber at a cost of $70 billion. With relations between the US and the Soviet Union on the up, production may now be cut back. Meanwhile, the stealth fighter, which uses the same radar invisible technology as a stealth bomber, has been unveiled for the first time. The Pentagon has released a videotape of the fighter, which looks like a science fiction fantasy.
The stealth fighter was one of the best-kept military secrets and most expensive weapons of the last decade. The Air Force ordered 59 of the bat-shaped aircraft in the early 80s. They were kept in hangars at a secluded base in the Nevada desert and, until last year, flown only at night. The aircraft, the slowest, most costly fighter in the Air Force, is made mostly of non-metal composite materials, allowing it to slip past enemy radar. But only 2 have been used in combat, in Panama, to drop 2 bombs that any less exotic aircraft could have dropped.
It tells us that stealth can be developed, can be used on an operational aircraft, is a successful technology, that it works.
But defense economists are not sure what the taxpayers have bought for the total price of $6.5 billion, which includes research and development.
Clearly, we're getting a tactical bomber, an airplane that is able to elude radar, fly in very low, hit a target with some precision with a bomb. What is not clear is whether we're getting a plane that can defend itself if it's detected by another fighter.
The Air Force hopes the fighter, which is paid for, will impress enough people to win funding for this B-2 stealth bomber still in testing.
One Air Force official complained that the proposed stealth bomber, which will cost $500 million each, could not be kept secret as long as the stealth fighter. Congress is in shock over the bomber's price tag and may scrap the program.
In South Africa, Nelson Mandela has welcomed President F.W. de Klerk's decision to send in the troops to pacify the black townships. But Mr. Mandela has demanded that black leaders be consulted by the government. He said a unilateral action without consultation is bound to be ineffective.
Nelson Mandela was left upset and dismayed as he toured the charred remains of homes which have borne the brunt of the violence in Natal. He offered sympathy and consolation to the victims of the 3-year-old power struggle between the United Democratic Front, which is allied to Nelson Mandela's own ANC, and Inkatha, the movement led by Zulu chief Buthelezi. The scale of the violence was all too evident. A body left in the debris after a home was petrol bombed. A witness said others from the house fled in panic. A shell apparently used in the attack. Mandela's presence sparked differing reactions. His supporters shouted and cheered. He told them, "We are not fighting in Inkatha, we are fighting against repression." Elsewhere, his motorcade was apparently met with stone-throwing youths, though none got close to his car. At a press conference after his tour, Mandela said he was alarmed at the extent of the damage and the deaths, but impressed by the high morale of the people. Troops patrolled some of the worst-hit townships, but the police reinforcements ordered by President de Klerk were yet to arrive. For their part, the authorities said the townships were tense, but under control. Adam Harding, Sky News.
And look at the sport now and results from last night's football. In Barclays League Division 1, Liverpool 2, Wimbledon 1, and Queen's Park Rangers won 2-0 at Southampton. Barclays League Division 2, Wolverhampton got the late equaliser against Bournemouth to keep their run going. Also Barnsley 0, Blackburn 0. FA Cup semi-finalists Oldham were beaten at Leicester and Sheffield United were beaten at home by Sunderland. In the B&Q Scottish League Division 1, Airdrie 3, Clydebank 4. Division 2, Dumbarton 1, Kilmarnock 3. The West Indies have beaten England in the 5th and final one-day international in Barbados. After a thrilling match shortened by rain, the Windies got home in the last over. The final score, England 214 for 3 after 38 overs, the West Indies 217 for 6.
5,000 British fans greeted England's openers, David Smith, thrown in at the deep end after just 48 hours in the Caribbean. He soon discovered what batting here is all about. A vicious Moseley bouncer hitting him plumb on the helmet. And after 65 uncertain minutes, he played all round a straight one and lost his off stump. To make matters worse, X-rays later revealed he's badly bruised his left hand. But Robin Smith was in no mood to be intimidated. Courtney Walsh, the victim here.
Walsh has come back, had his problems.
He did have some luck though. Richardson held the catch at deep point, but the umpire had signalled no ball.
Taken, but it's a no ball.
Wayne Larkins made 34 before a combination of the ball and his body saw England 2 down for 98.
Larkins goes with a Yorker.
But skipper Alan Lamb was in a hurry, playing shots from the moment he arrived at the crease. He and Smith added 63 before Curtly Ambrose reacted brilliantly to throw down the stumps and send Smith back for 69.
But that really was superb, picked up in the left hand.
Lamb went on to reach a quick-fire 50 himself in the final over, and England's total of 214 looked likely to be enough.
And that brings up the 50 for Lamb.
But they reckoned without Desmond Haynes. This towering 6 off the Freitas came in only the second over.
Well, on the roof, it's square leg.
Small did account for Greenwich, but the Windies didn't slow up. Richie Richardson finding Lewis meat and drink on the easy-paced pitch.
Well, they're really throwing their bats here now.
Eddie Hemmings came on and immediately got rid of Haynes. Nasser Hussain taking the catch. Richardson was the man they wanted though, but he was scoring at will as England's bowlers began to tire. Carlisle Best joined in by flicking De Freitas over backward square for 6. His 51 came in just 43 balls.
That's a big 6.
Small finally ended Richardson's stay, but by then he'd made 80 and the match was almost over. It was left to Jeff Dujon to hit the winning runs. West Indies victors by 4 wickets with 3 balls to spare and in irresistible form on the eve of the crucial 4th test. Trevor Harris, Sky News.
No Barbadian weather here. The scene from the satellite shows bands of clouds spreading south across the country, giving sleet or snow in places. A thicker area of cloud can be seen moving down the North Sea, giving some spells of snow along the east coast. In summary then, another cold, bright day with wintry showers most frequent in the north and east. That's it from me for the moment. Back again at the top of the hour with a full bulletin and more on that siege at Strangeways prison. There's some movement there at the moment. Our reporter Shirley Lewis is at the scene. We'll join her again at the top of the hour. See you then.
Hello, on this edition of the Frank Boff interview, will Environment Secretary Chris Patten's plan to cap local authorities bring poll tax rates down and save the Tories? Plus, why history is no longer about 1066 and all that. And Britain's Oscar winner Phyllis Dalton, the backstage queen of frocks who makes the stars shine on the silver screen. Well, we're beginning this edition of the programme with the government's latest moves to keep the burden of poll tax down. Now, the Environment Secretary, Chris Patten, has within the past few hours announced plans to cap local authority spending in key councils, most of them which are Labour-controlled. Well, so as the government strives to make its community charge stick, we're asking whether the latest move will hit local services or whether the Tories are right when they accuse high-spending councils of inflating their budgets while palming off the blame for high poll tax charges onto the government. Quentin Marshall, the leader of Greenwich Council, where the community charge is £408, are you one of those boroughs?
Yes, we've been asked to find £10 million cuts by this government.
And what does that mean in terms of percentage of your budget?
About 5%.
And what are you going to cut? How are you going to?
Well, first of all, we're not going to cut. We're going to look at the evidence that we've already given to the government, because we argue that their standard spending assessments, their government grants, is not adequate for our needs. We're going to look again at that, and we're going to appeal against their decision as we're allowed under law in the next 28 days and ask the government to reconsider. It's quite clear there is lots of evidence that we are not given enough grant.
So in other words, you're going to try and legal your way out of it, are you?
It's not legal. It's allowed in the law that we're allowed to appeal against his decision, ask him to change his mind, looking at the evidence we give.
Why is your community charge so high at £408?
Well, it's only high if you want to have no services at all. It need not be at 408 if we had the same sort of grants, same percentage of grants that the Borough of Wandsworth, for instance, is given. If we had that sort of grant, we would only have a poll tax of 199.
Well, the Borough of Wandsworth is represented here by the leader of the council, Sir Paul Beresford. Yours is 148. Everybody knows that. It's the lowest in the country. Why is yours so low and his is so high?
Because he can't manage his service properly. I think most of the councils in the country are waking up to the fact that though the government's requiring them to set a community charge, it's down to them to set the level. It's down to them to look for the services, to look at the way in which they produce them, and they've had 2 years' warning. They've had more than enough time to look at better ways of producing their services and better ways of producing an increased level of services for less.
Perhaps you're giving fewer services in your borough than he is in his, which is why his is more expensive.
Well, in fact, that's not correct. It's the other way round. And if I compare, to compare directly like with like, is to compare the Labour Party days in Wandsworth with the Conservatives now. We've managed to reduce the numbers of people on our housing waiting list. The numbers of people on our bed and breakfast will, by the end of this month, be down to 100.
Where are they all, by the way?
Where are they all? They're all housed. We've housed them, and we've used capital receipts, etc., that we've been able to achieve by using the guidelines that the government has produced over the years, but they've been resisted in Labour areas. We've used competitive tendering, and we've managed, by using competitive tendering, whether the service is in-house or outside, to produce better services for less.
You're just a bad organiser. You're bad business people in
No,
Greenwich.
Quite the opposite. Using the topics that Sir Paul's just talked about, we have no people in bed and breakfast. So we're actually more efficient than his authorities on that. Secondly, we've just inherited education, like Wandsworth has. We have the largest school-age population. We're going to be the largest in a London education
But clearly
authority.
you are spending more money on these services than they are. Is that correct?
I mean,
not necessarily on education. To be fair to him, as we are, he's inheriting education at a level that the Inner London Authority, Education Authority, left. So that we're on similar grounds there.
Yeah.
But if you actually compare the services pre-education coming across, then there is a difference.
But if I were a burgher of Greenwich now listening to you, I'd say, well, why can't you do it like him?
Well, we are doing it like him at a level which is accepted by the government. The government's district auditor, who was set up by the government to make sure, in my opinion, to make cuts occur, has actually said we're an efficient authority, that we're doing all right.
But you've been capped to do.
Exactly.
You've been asked to lose 10 million quid.
Because the government, in the way they've operated this capping system, has shown clearly bias. Of the 20 authorities that have capped, they are all Labour authorities. It is clear that the government has had to do a face-saving exercise because of their attempts at persuading authorities to cut spending. Conservative boroughs and authorities, as well as Labour boroughs and authorities, have spent more money than the government said.
What about this charge that many councils, including the Labour ones particularly, have hiked up their budget? 16% more budgeted for this year than last, so therefore poll taxpayers are in fact paying 30% more than the old rate.
We have made nearly £7 million.
So all these government charges are all lies, are they?
The government, like all people who are in difficulties, are trying to find ways out of their problems. When they first brought in the poll tax, they went on about the accountability issue, that like rates, people would vote in the elections on the poll tax figure. In the last few months, they discovered that Conservative authorities, unlike Wandsworth, who does everything the government says, it seems, the Conservative authorities who wanted to give a good service, a good delivery to their citizens, could not keep down to the levels the government was saying.
So in other words,
you have to change their own system and go against the things they've said.
You haven't upped your budget by 16%?
Not at all.
Well, what do you make of that? I mean, that's been a common charge by the Conservatives against Labour-controlled councils.
I think it's quite patently obvious that we've got a game of politics here, and if you actually look at the methods and the techniques that the government have put through in recent years, it's been to try and concentrate the minds of local politicians on producing the job, producing the services, and producing the value for money prices, compulsory competitive tendering. They brought in targeting, and it was shrugged off by the Labour Party predominantly. They brought in rate capping, and there were riots in the streets like we had the other day. The point is that they're trying to score points for Mr. Kinnock, whereas what they really ought to be doing, in my opinion, is knuckling down and getting on with the job.
When you look at Wandsworth, do you see the money spent better, or do you see fewer services? I mean, is it a bad comparison between the pair of you?
It's a very bad comparison, because we are trying to deliver what the people in the borough want and have shown.
But they're perfectly happy with what they're getting in Wandsworth. They're not screaming blue murder, are they, in Wandsworth, saying we want this, we want more libraries, we want more education, we want more social services?
Better than that. They've sent us back to do it again and again, 3 times in a row, and next month, they'll do the same.
So I come back to the question, why the difference?
The difference is because the government has given extremely good grant support to Wandsworth.
What, more to you than to you?
No, and if you look to the question about the
Have you not had any grants?
We did, but not enough, according to even the government.
Not as much as Wandsworth?
As I said earlier on, if we had had the same grant allotment as Wandsworth, we would only have had a poll tax figure of 199.
Support.
The difference is that you've got very much more grant in toto per head of population than Wandsworth.
And that's why we get a low amount of grant. We also have a growing population.
Sorry, you've missed
a place called Thamesmead where lots more people live than before. The government themselves recognise that we are not treated properly.
The government, the total grant given to you through the government is very much greater than that of Wandsworth. We get the second lowest in Inner London. The second lowest. Every single Labour authority, bar one, gets more, considerably more. My neighbour Lambeth, which is very much the same, gets £324 per adult next year, more than Wandsworth.
Can I ask you, if you in the end have to shave off this 10%, no, it's 5%, something like that, isn't it?
4.5%,
10 million
pounds.
The people, I gather, of Greenwich will pay £65 less. That's a rough calculation. Is that right?
That's extremely rough, because the way the government's calculated is it appears to be on 100% collection, and the Scottish experience shows even in Wandsworth there would not be 100% collection.
But you could find that, couldn't you? I mean, 5% is not that much. I mean, what would go, do you think?
If we had to find 10 million and the government did not change their mind and the law court said the government was being reasonable, we would have to be looking at the new education service that we've taken over. It's only the 3rd day of running it, and we've already had the problems of growing their budget, looking at social services provision, looking at leisure provision.
Can I ask you, this was supposed to be a very simple piece of legislation, the poll tax community charge. It's now become amazingly difficult. And isn't it part of the fact that you're in deep trouble as a party, and you've got to kind of legal your way out of this? You've got to grade it, you've got to give money back and so on?
No, I think the difficulty is that it's going to take time for it to settle down. It's going to take time for people to understand that Mrs. Thatcher's government require the councils to set the community charge, that it's the level that's set by those councils that's taking the sting at the moment.
But it was to have been very
And
simple.
people-
It's not.
I know. The other difficulty is that the rate system is so darn complicated that nobody could understand it. This is simpler than the rate system, and it's the little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Can I ask you finally, very briefly, I mean, do you think there'll come a day when we'll all settle down with a poll tax and everybody will be reasonably happy that they
Not
want to
at all.
contribute?
Not at all. When the Labour government is elected, at the next election, the poll tax will go away. And it's clear from the way the government operates now, they know that it's an imperfect system. They're trying to cut expenditure, and they know that they have no regard for ordinary people.
Gentlemen, I have to stop there. Thank you so much for calling back today. Thank you. We'll take an ad break now. We'll be back on the programme with the latest row over how Britain's children should be taught.
The siege at Strangeways prison appears to be crumbling. All roads to the prison have been sealed off and police vans and ambulances are at the scene. Meanwhile, the first fatality at the prison has been confirmed. And Environment Secretary Chris Patten says 20 local authorities in England will have their poll tax rates charge capped. More on that Strangeways siege and other news at 1.
What about giving the wife a new pair of eyebrows for Easter? Something original for the holidays.
For us at home, it was all terrifically exciting news. And nobody was surprised to hear that Winston Churchill was on the spot.
Who is that man? This fellow?
Yes,
I don't know. Forget about it. Are you making films and things? Huh? Just a little. Well, let's act.
Tis gusty. That's what he calls it. Animals parading themselves without clothes. Snails seem to get everywhere, don't they?
Welcome back. I have a little test for you that's sure to take you back to your school days. Tell me, what were the dates, do you think, of the Battle of Hastings, Great Fire of London, and the Great Reform Act? Well, 1066, 1666, I've got a prompter, of course, and 1832. Now, if you didn't get them, never mind, because a new report on teaching history today, can I just borrow this? It's a formidable document. It argues that the subject is more about imagining yourself as one of the William the Conqueror's archers than actually being able to remember the date of the Battle of Hastings. But while the report sets out the new views on how history should be taught in Britain's schools, it has upset, I suspect, many of the old chalkies of the history establishment. And if the Prime Minister's views are anything to go by, the authors of new method history are going to be given the dunce's cap. Let me introduce, first of all, Mr. Martin Roberts, who teaches history. What does this formidable report say about how history should be taught, and do you approve of what it says?
I do approve of what it says. What it says is history could be taught in a variety of ways, but in particular it can be taught looking at cause and consequence, looking at interpretations of subjects, looking at the way evidence is used to reach historical generalisations.
And don't we do that already?
Well, yes and no. We don't do it in a very systematic way, and I think this is the crucial thing which we'll be discussing, I suspect, in a moment. It puts knowledge in those contexts in such a way that knowledge is lively and youngsters experience a lively and stimulating experience.
In other words, it will make it attractive and interesting for youngsters. That is a crucial part of the argument, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Professor Skidelsky, what do you think of this report, what you've made of it, and do you think it's along the right lines? Do you approve of what it's saying?
Well, I think it's a very good report on the whole. It certainly opens up the subject. It's very, very thorough. It's very wide-ranging, and I think it puts the whole debate on a much more solid basis. Incidentally, I didn't agree with the characterization that it promotes imagining yourself into some sort of character in the past.
Very few people do agree with my introductions to their item.
No, in fact, it emphasizes knowledge all the way through. The real question is whether it manages to embody that emphasis in the attainment targets.
Tell me what the debate is. What are the lines drawn? Some people are simplifying it to say it's about learning dates, as I said there, learning the battles and the major dates, the political dates in our history, and the kind of context of when that history took place. I would have thought it was a mixture of both that is required.
Well, of course, that's what it's coming to, and I must say that much of the debate, or the polarized positions, has been entirely the creation of the media, who like to see it in terms of battles. Of course, history is about battles, and here's another battle. But what the report says, and this is a very valuable thing, it says knowledge includes understanding. And if you start from that basis, you can have all the fun, but you also have the hard facts, and the hard facts are part of knowledge, understanding them, understanding how they connect with each other, understanding not only what happened, but why it happened, and what the consequences of things
Well,
are.
I tell you,
a part of knowledge.
I remember when this
Also.
began. It had nothing to do, by the way, with the media at all. It had to do with politicians standing up and saying, we must teach British history. We're losing the contact with British history. We should get the old dates learnt by rote. We didn't do that in the media. This was a government thing, an education department thing, wouldn't you agree? And that's what stirred this debate and oversimplified it.
Yes, I'm sure the oversimplification is real. I think the major difference between Professor Skidelsky and myself, and I think it's the one which we ought to explore, is whether one should set knowledge aside as a separate attainment target.
Now, explain to me what you mean by that, by setting knowledge aside.
Well, one absolutely central characteristic of the national curriculum is testing at 7, 11, 14 and 16. And that testing will be based on the attainment targets which are defined in this report, the geography report and the science report and so on. And if in fact the testing goes for dead knowledge, arid lists of facts with no trace.
Can you recite this, that, the other, which was a common question.
And it's about memorisation rather than understanding, then the experience of youngsters in schools will be poor. And my worry about setting knowledge as a separate attainment target is because there's so much pressure on teachers.
Now, presumably, you can set a target and measure and mark facts and figures and recitations, but it's rather more difficult to measure knowledge, isn't it? Attainments in knowledge.
Well, I think all the attainment targets are going to be very, very difficult because they are all based on the concept of levels of attainment ranging from 1 to 10, and how you assess levels of knowledge is very, very difficult. But you see, what actually happens is that they've done everything but mention knowledge. For example, they talk of understanding, measuring understanding. But they've earlier said that knowledge includes understanding.
Well, doesn't
so
it?
why not say knowledge?
Yes.
The reason they don't say knowledge is that they're terrified that because they've got this caricature view of knowledge, as you put it, arid collections of dates and facts which are not connected with each other, they don't want to mention the word. But what a terrible position it is when talking about history that you can't mention the word knowledge. It's a knowledge-based subject.
Yes, but I mean, I didn't think it was ever quite like that. I mean, surely what history is about, you've got to know when it happened.
Yeah.
You've got to know what the date was and when it happened, where it happened, and why it happened, and how it affected the people who were part of it and came afterwards.
That's right.
Isn't that a kind of a simple definition of what we're about?
Here.
Well, what's so complicated about that?
Can I give you an example which I think might actually encapsulate this debate? Just take 1066 and the Norman Conquest. Now, what the working group is recommending is, yes, the Norman Conquest should be there, but it should always be approached through the attainment targets about cause and consequences of the Norman Conquest, about interpretations, about the Riot tapestry, and about the various chroniclers, about the way various bits of evidence are used. And they say, and I agree with them, having defined these key bits of information which are here in this report, you don't actually need to set up a separate knowledge attainment target, which have the Norman Conquest 1066, the Battle of Trafalgar 1805.
Can I introduce one of the worries that the government has rather hijacked education here, and that you know, it's teaching a political creed and not so much history? Are you worried about that? Have you got sufficient control over your teaching not to let that happen?
I don't think the government has hijacked it. I don't think they'd be allowed to. There are too many intermediate bodies set up. I think the real worry is that the content may be overprescribed here. There is so much stuff that's in there. There's British history, which is going to be the core. There's European history. There's world history. There's ancient history. And what's more, there are all these very detailed history subject units. Yeah. Now, you can always quarrel about what you put in and what you leave out. For example, in the modern compulsory unit on Britain, they've left out the First World War.
Well, I mean, recent history of the last 5 or 6 months is absolutely riveting stuff.
Well, it stops in 1969. Anyway.
It does. Yes, that's when the curriculum stops, is it?
That's when the curriculum stops, at least in British history. But, for example, to leave out the First World War, which is a really major turning point in the 20th century, perhaps the major one, seems to me not to make sense. But you're always going to have this sort of quibble when you over-control what goes in.
I want to give you a final word. Is it going to be difficult to implement? I gather it's now going to people to comment on, and the professionals will be able to comment on it. When's it going to come in, and when's it going to happen, do you reckon? Is it going to be difficult?
Well, John McGregor has postponed the discussion by about 2 months. I mean, he's had a new period of 2 months.
Are we going to have to throw all the old history books away, aren't we?
I think if a report like this comes in, which I hope it will, then most of the books in most history cupboards are obsolete and they'll need to be replaced. And there is an investment which I hope the government actually will recognise.
Oh, what an optimist you are. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. We'll take a break now, shall we? Next on the programme, the woman who made Kenneth Branagh a king.
May means movies on Sky Movies. Phil Collins and Julie Walters. Buster. Jack Nicholson and Meryl Streep as you've never seen them before. Ironweed. A successful doctor with a lust for danger. House of Games. Danny DeVito and Billy Crystal throw Mama from the train. Freddy's back. A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2.
You just made it with my android. Ew!
Making Mr. Right. Melanie Griffith. Funny girl. Something wild. A voyage to the outer limits. Night Flyers. The Old West will never be the same.
The Free Amigo!
2 kids on the run from just about everybody. Big shots. Get ready for Friday the 13th. Sonny was a boy with a talent for love.
Well, he is a little big for his age.
He's the woo-woo kid. Donald Sutherland and Al Pacino. Revolution. 48 brand new titles in May. Only on Sky Movies.
Welcome back to the Frank Boff interview. Have you ever wondered, I wonder, who made Anthony Hopkins, the Hunchback of Notre Dame? Or who put the Sheikh into Peter O'Toole in Lawrence of Arabia? Well, the answer is someone who has spent a lifetime dressing up the stars, Britain's Phyllis Dalton. And in her latest success on the silver screen, she caught the eyes of the Hollywood judges, winning an Oscar for her costumes in the latest film version of Shakespeare's Henry V, starring Kenneth Branagh. Well, Phyllis, many, many congratulations.
Thank
well, here it stands, and it's the greatest accolade in the business, and it's not the only one you've got 2 of them.
Yes, that's my old one. There's a new one coming now.
The new one, which you got for Branagh's Henry V, yes. That's been engraved.
That's right. Yes.
Tell me about this one. This goes back to 65, isn't it?
That's right, to Dr. Zhivago. Yes.
And you're pleased with that one?
Yes, I've been very happy with my one for a long time.
Absolutely.
I didn't really think I'd get another one.
You've got a place for them. They will evenly balance along the mantelpiece.
Beautifully, yes. Might even build a new bookshop.
Wonderful.
Why not?
Wonderful. Now, tell me something about your skill and your craft, because that was, who was in that now, Zhivago? There was Julie Christie, Omar Sharif. Yes, one of the Geraldine Chaplin.
Yes.
What about Sharif? I mean, he was the great heartthrob, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Maybe he still is. I don't know. I haven't seen him for a long time.
And for that particular film, I mean, as I recall, it was set in Russia. Was it shot in Soviet-Lithuania?
No, we didn't go to Russia at all. That was a challenge because we made it almost entirely in Spain. A second unit went to Finland for about 3 weeks to do the really vast vistas of snow because we were stuck in Spain and we were going to do the snow up in Soria in the northern region, where I believe they're supposed to have an awful lot of snow, but not the year that we were shooting.
I see. Now, what were the problems of dressing that? Because obviously the period dictates what the dress is, don't you? And the kind of weather, presumably.
Yes, I think one of the challenges to me was, and probably to the art director as well, that there are an awful lot of people still around that know exactly how it looked and how everyone dressed. And as we've said, we didn't go to Russia. But we did have lots of very, very good reference.
Yeah.
And the other thing was, because it was difficult to budget, because when you've got people living in such cold conditions, you don't know how many layers of real clothing it's going to take to make them look right.
Yes, how many sort of changes would a star have, like Sharif or
Sharif, well, of course, that one he did age from, you have the problem of aging as well. So I can't remember exactly now.
And you had a team of how many? A team of how many?
I would probably have had about 20 in the wardrobe on that, because you have certain people who look after probably a dresser for each of the main stars, and people to do the washing, and people to do what we call breaking down, making things of those, and repairing things and sewing and work.
We'll come to Branagh in just a second, because it's a curious coincidence. The first time you worked on a film like that as a seamstress, learning your craft, was on the first Henry V.
That's right.
With Olivier.
Olivier's Henry V.
Did you touch the hem of the great man?
I didn't. I've always regretted that. I always regretted that I never did work on a film that he was on. Yeah. He was one of my great heroes.
And then it went full circle, and you came around to doing and dressing Branagh.
I mean, when the Branagh one was suggested, I mean, it was almost uncanny. So obviously then one desperately wanted to do it.
Yes.
And
We have some of the costumes you made. I mean, did they owe anything to what you'd learned way back in 1944, wasn't it?
I think they owe a lot to what you learn along the way and all the years in between.
These are all very accurate representations of the costume of the day, are they?
Yes, but Branagh didn't want it to be over pedantic and over heraldic, and he didn't want it to look jolly. He wanted it all rather sort of low-key.
Yeah.
So they're as real looking as one can make them. We did have a problem because with the battle, which we did in the field opposite Shepton Studios, our limited space.
It's amazing when you discover where these things were shot, isn't it?
And yes, limited number of horses. Couldn't afford any more.
On a shoestring.
On a shoestring.
And it won the great prize.
Yeah. But when you've got people being uncomfortable and wet all day, the one thing you've really got to do is keep their feet dry.
Yeah.
You know, people put up with a lot because they've got sopping wet, not just wet feet, but boots that fall apart.
And they howl for Phyllis when this has happened, do they?
Oh, yes, howl like mad, feel blood. So we bought a lot of very cheap old welly boots down Hackney Way.
Is he a nice
and
chap?
covered them.
Branagh?
I think he's super, yes.
I
mean, he's not just attractive, he's just a very intelligent person. I didn't think he'd have got that film off the ground.
Really?
And done what he had.
Because he got a lot of bad publicity last year. People were sniping at him a lot, he and Emma Thompson.
Totally unnecessary and absolutely not from him. He's smashing to work with.
You're very loyal, aren't you?
No, I'm not making it up. I think if you ask anyone that worked on that film, it was a great experience. Everyone's just waiting for another one.
Can I ask you about some of the nightmares? I mean, when have things gone dramatically wrong? Because, you know, you're travelling, you've got heavy materials, you've got heavy frocks and costume and so on, and you're living in inhospitable climates.
I can tell you one of my ambitions in life is to travel somewhere with just a handbag.
Really?
And not trailing a wardrobe party or leftover wardrobes and things like that.
So getting it through customs is another great problem.
Oh, yes, you learn to put on a very pro face and just walk through.
Lawrence of Arabia has made a great comeback because they discovered a lot more stuff that was shot for it. Did you dress that?
Yes, I did. We dressed every last Arab on that.
You see, you're talking about Zhivago, Lawrence of Arabia. I mean, I remember going to see those films. They were revolutionary films. I mean, we hadn't seen the screen like that before, the shooting like that before, the colour like that before.
The photography on Lawrence was just
stunning. Coming across the shimmer, do you remember that?
Absolutely.
But they just dressed in white there, didn't they? The old Arab stuff.
Just any old thing, yes, of course.
What were the problems there? There you were in the desert.
We were in the desert, but the thing was that all Lawrence's little tribes that moved with him, that long, long trek across the desert, each of those costumes was, I don't know whether you call it duplicated, but there were 10, each of those identical. Because we were first in Jordan and then we moved over to Spain. Obviously, we were putting them on different people.
Yeah.
So one had to have a lot of everything.
Is there a lot of...
job.
Is there a lot of inspiration in your designs, or do you go back... Presumably the research is a very considerable part when you're asked to dress a particular period.
It's the most fascinating bit, too, because that's when you can sort of daydream about how lovely it's all going to look before things start going wrong. Yeah. Or you can't find something you set your heart on that's a key to a costume, you know.
Have you ever lost anything? Lost a major costume?
Yes, on Dr. Zhivago we did. We lost Geraldine Chapson's ball dress. Again, it turned out all right in the end because what had happened was Birmingham Nathan's had made it in London originally, and we'd fitted it in London, but we'd had the embroidery done in Spain. So when it was lost, I just got the Spanish people, as they'd done embroidery before, but we had to use their material. They did it.
Thank you very much for talking. We could go on for ages. That's lovely, and when the other comes back, what a fine pair they're made. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, that's it for this edition of the programme. Do join me tomorrow, every weekday night, live at 8:30. We're here on Sky News. It's the best way to make use of your dish, or indeed your cable. Until then, goodbye.
Jameson here, inviting you to join me every Monday to Thursday night for some great entertainment. What makes it special is that anybody who's somebody is likely to drop in. And believe me, you never know who that might be. On this show, it could even be your next-door neighbour. Why not? Always plenty of surprises, and we'll keep you up to date with the news of what's happening around town. Jameson Tonight, the only place to be, Mondays to Thursdays, 10 p.m, Sky One.
Strangeways riot streets around the prison have been sealed off. An alleged sex offender, the first prisoner, confirmed dead. And Patton caps the poll tax. Labour call it a political fix. Good morning, it's 1 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Overnight on Wednesday the 4th of April. I'm Lindsay Brancher. The Strangeways prison riot, and in the last couple of hours the streets around the prison have been sealed off. A police Range Rover was seen escorting a prison van away from the jail. There's been no confirmation of further surrenders, but it looks as if there have been further developments. In the last few minutes, police motorbike outriders escorted a big blue van around the back of the prison. Our reporter Shirley Lewis is outside the prison. Shirley, what's happening?
Quite a lot of activity, with another police escort has gone past the top end of the road behind us. That consisted of a rover, police motorbike outriders and further cars. In the last few minutes we've seen a large contingent of police wearing riot gear running into the prison directly behind the main gates. During the last hour or so there's been torchlights sweeping the building. All the lights are off now. Earlier there were a couple on, but they're all off now. It would appear that the police have gone in. Again, whether there's been further surrenders or not, we don't know.
How long do you think this is likely to go on for? Has anybody come out to tell you what is likely to happen?
No, no one has come out. Normally the Home Office spokesman will make his next appearance in the morning unless they have some very good news, but he's been timing his statements roughly at the same points of the day, about 6 o'clock in the morning, midday, and then in the evening. The main factor is that as I say, we have seen vans going in round the back, the motorbike police outriders. Something is obviously afoot. The streets are still sealed off all around Strangeways.
Shirley, we'll hold it there. We'll come back to you later on in the programme should there be any developments. Thanks very much. Meanwhile, the first death has been confirmed. Derek White, on remand on charges of indecent assault and buggery, died in hospital after being admitted with head wounds. The Home Office has confirmed he was a Rule 43 prisoner, which means he was in solitary confinement for his own protection. White, who was 46, was first remanded a month ago. 20 local authorities in England are to have their poll tax rate charge capped by the government. Opposition MPs reacted angrily to the list of local authorities that the Environment Secretary Chris Patton says will now be compelled to lower their rates. 18 of the 20 are Labour-controlled and the other 2 have no party in clear control. They are hung councils. 8 of the authorities are in London. Savings for those paying the community charge in these authorities will be between £30 and £99. In the other 12 authorities in England, people will save between £26 and £59 once the charges are capped. Mr Patton said the decision will benefit 4 million people. Labour described the list as a political fix.
Practically all the councils Mr Patton is capping are Labour-controlled.
Not very surprising.
Though he got a derisive Labour reception for his claim that with overall local government spending 30% above last year, he simply chose the top 20 most deplorable high spenders, those who exceeded his spending assessment per head by at least £75 and 12%.
It is deplorable that local authorities have chosen to budget at these levels, putting an unacceptable burden on local people. There is no justification for the level of charges which many authorities have in practice set.
The Environment Secretary's decision should slash at least £27 of 4 million charge payers' bills. But by not disciplining conservative high spenders, Labour allege the list of targets is a cynical political fix.
A rigged list drawn up in a cynical and desperate last throw to salvage something from the wreckage. Does he not reveal just how disreputable are the government's current aims? They've given up trying to make the poll tax work. They've given up trying to help the oppressed poll tax payers. Their sole and squalid aim now is to shift the blame for the whole poll tax fiasco for which they alone are responsible.
Some Tory MPs are complaining that their local councils haven't been singled out for the cap. But the affected councils do seem fairly clearly targeted. They include some of those which saw the largest anti-poll tax demonstrations, such as Labour Lambeth, which is set to become the 21st cap victim when it finally fixes its budget. Mr Patton has given the councils 28 days to appeal or comply, so capping is now bound to dominate the campaign for the local government elections, which take place at the beginning of May. Adam Bolton, Sky News.
Protests continued as the government announced its list of Labour councils singled out for capping. Trade union boss Norman Willis delivered his message that violence is not the way to lead the fight, but warned the government that its tactics mean the protests will continue.
If the government thinks the issue of the poll tax will drop out of sight before the next election, they must think again.
And there are Tory MPs with big poll tax bills from Conservative town halls in their areas who feel let down by the government.
Well, it confuses it. I think we have pretty inadequate legislation that Chris Patton's tried to make the best of, but very high spending authorities such as mine in Leeds are exempt from the sort of, capping treatment which he's dished out to others.
But for others whose Labour councils have been capped, it comes as a political boost.
Because it's really been outrageous the way the Hammersmith and Bourne Council has been pushing up expenditure. You know, they've increased expenditure by 80% in the last 4 years, even before taking on education. 1,000 more staff at the town hall. You know, people are realising they have to pay for that.
Labour members, though, are affronted by what they see as blatant political manipulation.
Well, they've managed to get a formula that only gets Labour authorities, 20 Labour authorities. It was a blatant fix. It was one of the most cynical exercises that I've ever seen in the House of Commons. And that's saying something, because I've seen an awful lot of those since 1983.
Yeah, I didn't look at the political complexion, of course I didn't. I looked at whether councils were spending excessively. And as the Secretary of State said today, you had to get down to about the 60th in the list to find a Conservative council. We have decided to propose caps for 20. And it is a fact that if you have a Conservative council, you get better value for money, you get better services.
And it was to force home the message that it's Labour authorities who are to blame for high charges that the government's list looks the way it does. But there's still a risk that it may not have the desired political effect. Judith Dawson, Sky News.
The Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze has told American leaders that Moscow wants honest dialogue with the rebel Republic of Lithuania. He arrived for talks with his American counterpart James Baker. Mr. Shevardnadze told reporters, "Our main weapon is honest dialogue." The Soviets have now closed Lithuania's border with Poland and the only one not attached to the USSR. A delegation from the rebel republic, which wants to break links with the Kremlin, has arrived in Moscow for talks on the issue, just as one chamber of the Soviet parliament passed a law allowing a veto on any move to independence.
The Soviet propaganda machine is working overtime in Lithuania. A Soviet army helicopter dropped leaflets denouncing the Republic's President Landsbergis, but the public are not persuaded. Soviet soldiers are still guarding the prosecutor's office they took over last Friday, but defiant protesters still managed to break in to demonstrate against its occupation. The Republic's pro-independence paper has also been taken over by troops. But the paper was on sale tonight after being secretly printed in a neighbouring republic. Earlier, a delegation of Lithuanian leaders arrived in Moscow, their mission, peace talks. They went on to have their first direct contact with Soviet officials, seen by the Republic as an encouraging step forward. Their meeting coincided with a debate in the Soviet Parliament about secession from Moscow. After a heated debate, the Parliament voted through the first stage, with certain riders. It still has power of veto over any move to independence. The chairman of the Supreme Soviet says he wants a compromise, but despite the conciliatory tone, the Soviets closed Lithuania's border with Poland this afternoon. It's the only crossing that doesn't adjoin Soviet territory. A second republic, Estonia, this evening called on the Kremlin to end its military pressure on Lithuania immediately and recognize its independence. Estonia also wants to break links with Moscow, but only on a step-by-step basis. The Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze is in Washington to prepare for a superpower summit in June, but he can't escape the issue of Lithuania. When questioned, he said Moscow wanted an honest dialogue with the Republic. No doubt the subject will be raised again when he meets President Bush on Friday. Alex Crawford, Sky News.
Scottish police are this morning questioning a 36-year-old Palestinian about the Lockerbie bombing, which killed nearly 300 people. Abu Talib, who was jailed for life in December for bombings in Denmark and the Netherlands, is refusing to cooperate. His flat near Stockholm was searched after it was discovered he'd travelled to Malta in the period before the Lockerbie bombing. Detectives found shreds of Maltese clothing in the suitcase, which is believed to have contained the bomb. Imelda Marcos, the former First Lady of the Philippines, was allegedly advised by US President George Bush how to spend her millions. Mrs. Marcos is now threatening to call Mr. Bush as a witness for her defense. The move came as the case against Mrs. Marcos was opened in New York. She's also been accused in court of treating the country as her own personal piggy bank. Mrs. Marcos is accused of racketeering, fraud and obstruction of justice. She could go to jail for 50 years if convicted. Schools across the country face disruption today because of a one-day strike by the second largest teachers' union, the National Association of Schoolmasters and Union of Women Teachers. But there's some doubt about how many of the union's 118,000 members will take part in the action, called in a protest over a government pay offer.
Leaders of the NASUWT claim schools could close in areas where their membership is strongest, but elsewhere the effect will be far less noticeable. All the other teaching unions say it's the wrong time for a strike, and even among the NASUWT there are doubts. Less than 60% of members took part in the strike ballot, and nearly 40% of them were against taking any action at all. But the union's General Secretary, Fred Smithers, is sure it's the right decision. He says it's not just a protest against the 8.3% pay offer, but a stand against declining standards in Britain's schools. And he believes parents will understand why the strike's been called and back the teachers. But the Education Secretary, John McGregor, says the strike is completely unjustified. He's urging all teachers to work normally. He said it was a critical time of year for many children, and depriving them of even a day's schooling was a disservice to the teaching profession. Stephen Grocott, Sky News.
Murder Squad detectives are investigating a double shooting which has left a married couple dead at a gypsy camp in Dorset. 44-year-old James Benham and his wife Shirley, 31, were killed when they were shot at point-blank range. Their bodies were discovered in a caravan. The shooting happened at the camp at Cocos Froome on the outskirts of Dorchester. Police were called to the scene after a taxi driver raised the alarm. He'd been called to the camp to pick up a fare. The Duke of Edinburgh will sit through one of the Old Bailey's more steamy sex cases later today. He's due to spend the day at the court where the country's most notorious murderers and spies have all been tried. Court 1 is currently hearing the case of a part-time sex aid salesman who is accused of murdering his wife's lover. The prosecution claims Graham Skates had a bizarre sexual pact with his wife Rowena. He encouraged her to have affairs so long as she didn't get emotionally involved. The prosecution claims that when she did become attached to a wealthy company director, Richard Nelligan, her husband attacked and killed him. Skates denies murder, and today Prince Philip will hear the start of the defence case. Yesterday, Justice Rougier adjourned the case before lunch and urged barristers to make sure they had evidence for the Duke to hear today. Ports and airports are on the alert for a rapist on the run from the Old Bailey. The same Turk escaped while the jury was considering its verdict. In his absence, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. He'd been given bail against the police's wishes, but by the judge at the Old Bailey. Before the trial, Turk had been arrested at Gatwick, trying to board a plane out of the country. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has been speaking about what he called the bumpy ride ahead before the inflation rate begins to come down. He told a Commons committee yesterday interest rates should fall next year, and he said he still intends to take the pound into Europe's exchange rate mechanism.
The Treasury Committee hearings gave MPs from all parties their first opportunity to quiz the Chancellor on the budget. John Major stuck closely to the forecast he gave then, but he did claim there were now real signs that high interest rates had done the trick and were slowing demand.
So I think interest rates will be beginning to move down. I think if we're going to have inflation at 5%, which is our central forecast for the middle of next year, it defies logic that interest rates would still be at their present level of 15%.
And for a committee that's on record supporting sterling's early entry into Europe's exchange rate mechanism, the Chancellor's answers to their questions followed the more positive vein he said to have taken with his European colleagues last weekend.
Have the conditions other than inflation for British membership of the exchange rate mechanism been met, apart from details?
No, but they're moving towards being met. A good deal of progress has been made on a number of the conditions for membership of the exchange rate mechanism, but they haven't all been met. And the inflation
John Major's answers reasserted his independent line from the Prime Minister's almost universally negative stance on the European monetary system. And on the budget too, he insisted it was no one's but his own. Mark Nichols, Sky News.
You're watching Sky News Overnight. We'll take a break now. Coming up in part 2, the United States unveils its top secret stealth fighter. Stay with us.
However unpredictable, however unexpected, however unlikely, however would you know without Sky?
Delivery, love. Great. I've been waiting for this.
You can never be too careful when it comes to home security.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Keep your front doors safely between you and any stranger.
Fantastic.
No matter who you are. Crime. Together we'll crack it.
Boxing is best on Eurosport. 3 times a week we clamber into the ring for the best boxing there is. Every Monday night on Ringside Superbouts we turn the clock back to enjoy the most unforgettable fights, the most historic encounters. On Wednesdays and Saturdays we've World Championship boxing, tremendous title fights, hard-hitting action, bruising battles, brilliant boxing. And Eurosport will be traveling to Europe, the United States, and right around the world to bring the best and biggest title fights live. We don't pull our punches. Boxing is best on Eurosport.
Welcome back. It's just about 18 minutes past 1 here on Sky News Overnight. Defence